Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today saw patch 3.22.1d. This is one of those patches that had a number of really small changes in it, as well as a couple of important ones, and of course, new bugs. These bugs have been squashed now, but there were two very severe bugs that came with this, and these were fixed in a hotfix a couple of hours after the patch went live. The first of these was that players were unable to move or use skills at all after weapon swapping, which was very, very disruptive to players who use Portal in their offhand gem slots, as well as just to a bunch of other niche builds. The other bug that was coming up a very large amount, and again this one has now been squashed, is that there was a wonky interaction between Mirage Archer and any back attachment MTX. So that includes wings, that includes cloaks, a lot of things like that. What was happening was that Mirage Archer was conflicting with these, and this was causing a crash to desktop. So these bugs were live for about 2.5 hours, but they have now been fixed for about 3 hours. In terms of the changes that were made intentionally in the patch, not ones that were made unintentionally that have now been fixed, there are a number of very small quality of life changes to the Sanctum. For most players, these won't matter very much. They're just tiny little adjustments that improve the experience of the Sanctum, but don't have a very large impact on the game. The next thing that's been done is that the Eater of Worlds has had a couple of little adjustments to it. Now for most players these won't have any impact. Where these will kick in is if you are using some sort of retaliatory skill, but one that targets enemies. For example, if you link cast when damage taken to Fireball on your build, which is not a very popular choice for reasonably good reasons, what was happening prior to the patch is that if those little tentacles procced your cast when damage taken, the Fireball would aim at the tentacle, which would be gone, and therefore it would almost certainly whiff. Now it's going to aim directly for the Eater of Worlds. Now there's a couple of situations where this is a little bit more useful. The first one is if you have a retaliatory curse in a cast when damage taken setup. That is now going to hit the Eater of Worlds, even if the damage that procs it is coming from those tentacles. But probably much more significant is the interaction with Flamewood totem builds. Your totem that is connected to Flamewood support will now point its retaliatory projectile at the Eater of Worlds, rather than pointing it at where a tentacle used to be and now is an empty patch of ground. So this is going to be a substantial improvement for Flamewood builds and their ability to defeat the Eater of Worlds. The second change is a text-only change to how Divine Orbs and Blessed Orbs work. Now these will no longer specify that they only apply to numerical values. There's a number of unique items where it's more than numerical values that are being re-rolled. For example, Forbidden Shako. For Forbidden Shako, one of the mods on it is socketed gems are supported by level 25 to 35, and that's a random numerical value, of almost any support gem in the game. Now these support gems are actually treated as a random value as well. These also get randomized. This has always been the way that Forbidden Shako has worked, but now the text of the Divine Orb is going to tell you that. There is a real problem here though, and that is that there are a number of exceptions to the way that these work. For example, Forbidden Shako works the way we've been outlining here. If you apply a Divine Orb to it, it randomizes the gem that it applies to. However, the unique amulet Orbs Uprising, which drops from all the Crystal King in the Delve Mines, this does not work this way. The unique jewel Watcher's Eye, which drops from Elder and Uber Elder, this also does not randomize the skill, nor does it randomize any of the other effects that it gives to the aura. All it does is it randomizes the numerical effects. It would be really good if players could actually work out in-game without having to consult external resources like POE Wiki as to what the effect of a Divine Orb is going to be before you commit to using such an expensive currency. That's something I would like to see changed in the future, but that will be no small ask, especially given that some items really do take a bit from column A, a bit from column B, and here of course I'm thinking about the unique jewel Thread of Hope that drops both from Cirrus and from Uber Cirrus, and actually there are two different versions of that that function entirely differently. Very messy, but I would like to see some wording consistency here so that a player doesn't need to know that Watcher's Eye breaks the rules, that All's Uprising breaks the rules, and that Thread of Hope might or might not break the rules depending upon which version of it you have. Slight quality of life improvement to public stash tabs. After that there's a number of slight improvements to cosmetic MTX. And then one of those things that is very useful in corner cases. When you are searching for an item on the trade website, there are options to look for versions that are foil, there are options to look for versions that are not foil. Now, previously, whenever I've wanted to look for something that is not foil for various reasons, I've instead used item level as a proxy for this, because foil versions of items are almost universally item level 75. But there are exceptions. If you don't care which graphics that an item has, then you don't need to worry about this setting. But if you do want the default for some reason, then you've got the option of searching explicitly for that. Finally, there's a GFX update to monsters that have the Poisons modifier. In the bug fixes section, there's a whole lot of niche interactions that are worth having a quick read of, but there's one that is much more important than everything else. And that is that when you run Maven Witnessed Elder Guardians with the Destructive Play Atlas Keystone, which is a reasonably popular endgame farming option, the extra map bosses that were being summoned by the Maven were actually not able to drop the additional loot they're meant to drop. They would still drop the 10 rare items and 1 unique that they normally drop, but the additional loot that they're meant to give you because of the Destructive Play Keystone, which is a chance at Synthesis maps, a chance at Elder Slayer maps, a chance at Elder Guardian maps, a chance at Shaper Guardian maps, all of these were not showing up. That is now fixed. These bosses will now drop the loot they're intended to drop, which is more than they were dropping prior to this patch. Other than that, there's a lot of just real corner cases here. For example, Fortune Favors the Brave was bugged if you had bold undertakings allocated on your atlas, and additionally you are playing in a language other than English. This was bugged and it's now fixed. There's a whole bunch of other little things like this that probably won't affect a large number of players. One you're more likely to notice though, if you ever group up in the Labyrinth, is that there is a bug where Izaro would repeat his voiceovers. For every player that entered his room. This is something that was rather annoying for a very small percentage of people who run lab carry services, and this is now fixed. So if you want to have a look through all of the different bug fixes, you can have a look at that down in the patch notes, which I will link to below. 9 instance crashes were fixed, that's a welcome change, but other than that, everything else is pretty small. May your Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.